So that's a big lull on my part. Got the PM instead of the AM. I don't know how that happens on YouTube a lot, quite frequently, but here I am, and people will probably be getting the notification now. But actually, most of you are probably already used to me putting PM instead of AM. All right, so today we're going to take the opportunity, since I didn't have a chance to do any new material in Phaladipika, we're going to take that opportunity. We're going to take it as an opportunity. See, that's a lesson. The opportunity is now we can review Phaladipika so far. So if you have forgotten some of the things that were in there or didn't get a chance to see it, now's your chance. Is my mic overloading? Seems like it is. Check. Okay, that seems better. All right, here we go for the review. See, but there's already 11. You guys already know that I am bad like that. Okay, give me half a second. So, you know what? I want to just show you a bit more than usual. Let's see how this will work. Flip over to this and pull this over here. Oh, no, that's not going to work. This will work. So this way you could see the overview on the left of the whole thing. It's not exactly in order of Phaladipika because I'm kind of editing it. Intend to sort of reorder it a little bit. So, but basically, this is what you got. Let's show you the top level view of everything. There's the top level view of what we've covered in Phaladipika so far. Let me make sure you can see that. Yeah, see on the left side? So you got definitions of things. That's kind of the first most important thing that he did. So, and then he gave techniques for using those definitions. Then career, I think maybe doesn't have to be. It could be inside the techniques bit. And yogas. I guess yogas could also be inside the techniques, so why not just keep it out? So let's open this one up and see what's been in here. What did he define? He defined the planets. Oh, just a second. This is very professional. All right. He defined the planets. He defined the signs. He defined the houses. Those are the three basic things that you need to define. But he also did two other things, which sometimes we don't think of as basic things to get defined. He defined the bala, or potency for planets. Maybe put this into techniques section, because that is really what it is. It's another part of techniques. And then he defined Rashi Divisions. So he didn't just define signs, but he defined the divisions of signs. Why don't we'll take a look at those in more detail, of course, when we review all this stuff. Thank you, Bardo. Phaladipika. Eric, it's called Phaladipika. Which is what the stream is about on Tuesdays. Phaladipika is a 14th century Sanskrit text on astrology. So in techniques, what did he talk about? House analysis. You know, together we're going to do this. We're going to put these guys. We're going to put Shadbala here in one of the techniques. So, house analysis. You haven't seen this yet. This is my own notes. This is house analysis stuff is from chapter 15, I think, or 13. You didn't get to see that one yet. Yeah, so it really looks more like this. He talked about career techniques and yoga's techniques. So we'll look at each one of these. Hi, Seema. Hi, Kitty. Hi, Vela. Hey, Dreaming. Hey, Spacebug. Hey, Billy. Hello, everybody. So why don't we look at each one of these? Actually, I like this. It's helpful. So this is what the grand high-level organization of Phaladipika into these two divisions: definitions of things and then techniques for using the things. It's very important that you just have that basic categorization thing in your mind when you approach anything, really, any subject. Before you start tinkering with techniques, you really want to be sure that you really are clear and familiar with the definitions of things. Otherwise, your techniques are really, really sloppy. After you know the definitions of things really, really clearly, then the techniques are much easier to use and they get used more effectively, and with the thing that most people call intuition, which is not really something magical, but it's just expertise. Most people, they don't give a damn for definitions. They think they heard Jupiter signifies the color yellow, and that's all they need to know about Jupiter. Or Jupiter's religion. Boom, let's go. Let's learn techniques. So most people have very, very weak concept of definitions, but they spend their whole life studying all these techniques. Navamsha, this, the Dashamsha, an aspect of because the Yogatara of this and that. And if you use Charadash instead of... what are you going to do with the techniques when your definitions are weak? So, although there's more time devoted in the book to techniques than there are to definitions, it's more important for us to spend our time on the definitions. Anyway, let's review now what he's got here for definitions. How did he define the planets? Let's see what he got. So he's going to give a Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn definition, and then he's going to do a couple of things that are grouped. Like the personal traits, like the personality traits. If the sun was walking around your house, this is what he would be like. If the moon was a person living on your block, this is what the moon would be like. That kind of thing, right? And then some miscellaneous like things represented by the planets. And then what is this? When are planets bad? This should probably be moved to the techniques. And let's do that now. Okay, so definitions of planets. What kind of stuff? Like this is the definition of what they symbolize in astrology. So you get like the sun. From the sun, the wise learn about self-confidence. That's the real issue with the sun. Self-confidence. And then the things that result from self-confidence, which is reliability, courage, strongness or severity, zeal, dominance, participation in government, like the ability to lead and control others, because you have to be self-confident before you could do that. So that's the key thing about the sun, is that it's self. And not just self, not self in terms of particular specifics about yourself, not really. But the sun signifies how confidently and clearly you know yourself and are comfortable with yourself and are situated in yourself. And then also among places, the sky and space, as well as the tendency to wander to the hills and forests. Among people, it pertains to fathers. Among metals, it pertains to copper and gold. Boom. That's what he said about the sun. Let me know if there's questions that pop up on topic. Those would be great. Like if you have a question about what the sun represents right now, I'll definitely acknowledge it. How did he explain the moon? The moon describes the mother. See, the key thing about the moon is mind. The key thing about the sun is self. The key thing about the moon is mind. So people will trip on that because they don't know what mind is. And they don't know the difference between mind and self. So much of what we call our self-image is our mind image. So that's why you have a lot of meaningless discussions between people saying, no, the moon represents your identity. And somebody else says, no, it doesn't. It represents your mind. That's a meaningless discussion because the mind is the identity. Right? I mean, everything about yourself is part of your identity, but the mind is really, really fundamental. Because what is the mind? The mind is the thing that's holding you. The mind is your binary computer that's deciding yes or no about things. And it's yes means I like it and no means I don't like it. So therefore the mind is the thing which generates our desires and our emotions. Because liking something means wanting it. Disliking something means the opposite of wanting it. And then happiness means getting what you want and not getting what you don't want. And unhappiness means getting what you don't want and not getting what you want. So it's all these binary forks that come out that make the mind what it is. It's basically based on the yes-no machine. That basically defines who you are. I mean, really, people basically define themselves based on what they want, what they like, what they don't like. But clinically speaking, the moon is the mind and the sun is the self. Image is frozen. Oh, look, that's not really frozen on the most flattering image either. Let me see if I can reconnect to it. Or maybe it's... I am unfrozen. Elsa. I'm not Elsa anymore. Thanks for letting me know. Auspiciousness. Now, what did he say about Mars? Oh, you want to see more stuff that he says about Moon. So, feminine dispositions, affection, sweetness, gentility, female traits, mother, feminine figures, right? Beauty, complexion, feminine things. Because it's the mind. The mind is the internal thing which is processing data coming in and deciding how it feels about it. So it's the feminine aspect of things. Describes wellness and happiness of our mind and body, and thus the quality of our emotional and physical enjoyment. Describes feminine qualities in the natural world, agriculture, crops, fruits, and flowers, as well as oceans, waters, and baths. It describes symbols of royal comfort. Describes foods made from milk. Honestly, his definitions of the planets don't thrill me that much. That's not the reason why this is my favorite astrology book, not because of his basic definitions. It's actually his techniques that are really cool. The definitions of the planets are okay, but I think they're a little bit disordered. Like, the things are not put in. This is often the case with Sanskrit because the poetry of it takes such a precedence that they choose orderings of words that fit the poetry and they don't do it more clinically to have it organized ideally by ideas. Anyway, sorry, Mr. Montreshwar. I had a slightly critical statement of your definition of the planets. For Mercury, he says intellect. Well, that's a good one. That's what Mercury essentially is. It's how the intellect functions. People will have a lot of trouble grasping that because they don't know what intellect really does or is. Intellect, the mind is the yes-no machine, and the intellect is the input-output bus. So the intellect is the thing that takes information in from the external ports, processes it to turn it into something that can be understood by the mind, and then gives it to the mind. That's what the intellect does. And then takes the mind's reaction, views the mind's reaction to it, the yes or the no that comes from the mind, and then communicates to the ports what to do based on that. So, for example, if you see Baskin-Robbins ice cream, and then that data will come over your ports. It'll come over your eyes, your ears, etc. The sign of the Baskin-Robbins, the logo, etc. Maybe the ice cream in the glass case will come over the ports. The data, the raw data of it. The intellect is the one that makes sense of it and spells the word and sees Baskin, Baskin-Robbins. And the intellect is the one that makes sense of the smell and says, that's ice cream. Right? That's what the intellect does when I say the intellect takes the raw data from your input ports and then processes it and turns it into something the mind can deal with, can work with. So it turns it into this mind language now, which is like things like ice cream. It has these words. The intellect works with words and languages. In human species, they still have intellect and they still have words, but they're not vocalized or verbalized. So the intellect works on words. It translates data into words, gives it to the mind. The mind reacts. So like it will say, hey, there's a Baskin-Robbins. The mind will say, oh, yummy. Yes, that's a yes. Right? Then the view... Now it comes to the output bus after it gets the reaction from the mind. The intellect says, oh, that's a yes from the mind, so let's tell the muscle system how to move. So it sends out impulses to the legs to move towards the Baskin-Robbins. Right? It just starts to tell the kid to pull on his mom's shirt and say, Mom, can I? Now what happens next? The input from the mom. The mom's reaction is no. The ears just hear that word no, process it into something that can show the mind. The mind sees no, and what does it feel? This is how you get emotions. It could not get something that it wants. Now it feels unhappiness. The intellect sees the unhappiness and says, what should we do with this? Usually we'll say, let's express it. Let's show somebody that we're unhappy. It will trigger things to cry, etc. So this is what's going on between Mercury and Moon. If you don't take the time to be Vedic about your Vedic astrology, then you're not going to be that great at it. Also, even if it's not Vedic astrology, if you don't take the time to be classical about your classical astrology, like these same basic definitions permeated the world in the ancient times, and so they're there in Greece and all that kind of classical philosophy too. If you don't take the time to understand the difference, classically speaking, between self, mind, and intellect, but you want to jump into astrology, it's going to be mishmash. Because you're working with symbols that you don't even understand. So you'll be doing all these fancy techniques or whatever and trying to do all this high precision stuff or whatever, however far you take it, but you don't know what you're doing it with. You don't know what you're working on. So it's really, really worthwhile to learn, like, for example, Sankhya, basic Sankhya from India, so that you can understand what are they talking about when they talk about self, mind, intellect. And then when somebody in an astrology text just pops along and says, Moon is mind, and then goes on to the rest of the book, the reason why in these books on astrology, they don't have to sit there and explain that much at length what the moon is, what Mercury is, etc. It's because the people already know. And that at that time, they already were on the same page about what is meant by the mind, what is meant by the intellect, what is meant by... So all you would have to say is the moon is your mind. And then somebody would know. That means it's my emotions, it's my opinions about things, it's my desires for things or against things. And therefore, it's a very feely thing. It's a very subjective thing. It's not a very clear cut. It's a changeable thing. It's a fluid thing. All right? So that's Mercury. Mercury describes intellect, scholarship, education, all that kind of stuff. Speech, because that's the function of intellect. It's translating everything, dealing with words. Problem solving. Problem solving occurs when the output from the mind is like yes or no. The intellect has to figure out, what do I do? What do I do now? Right. So in this scenario with the ice cream, when the kid is presented with Baskin-Robbins, the intellect actually had to solve a problem. How do you get it? The mind says, yes, want. The intellect now has to problem solve. So that's what Mercury represents also, is the ability to figure out how to get from A to B. How to get something you want. Simple case would be we'll say, well, just move the legs over there and go and get out your wallet. Or ask mom. And then mom says no, then the intellect has another problem to solve, etc. Dr. Gaurav Singhal asks if health institutions are signified by the planet Mercury. No, but doctors are. Good, Bardo. See, Bardo says attending both Phaladipika and Bhagavatam streams help to sort out the planets and the significations. People think, why is this guy doing Bhagavatam on Thursdays? This is supposed to be an astrology channel. It's like the most hackneyed opinion you could possibly have. Back to Miss Dr. Singhal thing. Mercury is a doctor, but not the health institution. Why would Mercury be a doctor? You should be able to understand that if Mercury is the intellect, then it's scholarship and education. A doctor is a person who has studied something for a very long time. That's why we say, like, strictly speaking, we have to say medical doctor, right? You have to give an adjective to the doctor thing. Because you could be a doctor of anything. So, Mercury is a doctor, including a medical doctor. Any type of highly studied person will be significantly Mercury, or that trait of being highly studied is mercurial. But a health institution has a lot more to do with governance. So it has a lot to do with the sun. Institutionalizing things, organizing things. So an institution like a hospital or something is not just really going to be Mercury. It's going to be more sun. It's a function of the government to set up those kind of places. Spacebook. Relationships, this is why Mercury is about friendship and relationships, because it's about communication. It's the I/O bus. The intellect is the I/O bus. Huh? People think intelligence means not friendly, not social. But this is totally not a classical concept of intelligence. The problem with being intelligent is you get annoyed easily. When you're, let's say, 80% intelligent, you get annoyed easily because everybody else is like 10% intelligent. And it's frustrating and slow and repetitive. So sometimes intelligent people don't look very friendly. But actually, intelligence is the ability to pull in data, translate it into something, and then express something onto it. So intelligence is the very basis for interaction and relationship and friendship. It's the basis for communication, and communication is the basis for relationship. So Mercury is actually the basis for all of the friendships, partnerships, relationships, including marriage and everything. Mercury doesn't necessarily represent marriage, but Mercury represents the ability to cooperate and partner and communicate, which is an important part of any relationship. Oh, auspicious. Thank you. Venus, what does he say? Venus describes Srimatvam. So basically, Venus is like the moon, it's feminine. But moon is the feminine thing, which, like the aspect of femininity being internal versus masculinity being external or extrusive. Then that would mean femininity is intrusive. But actually, the action of masculinity is intrusive. It's complicated. Masculinity goes into things, goes out of itself and goes into things. Femininity pulls things into it. So the moon is that aspect of the internal part of the person, and that's why it's a feminine planet. Because it's the part that's on the inside and pulling things in and dealing with the things on the inside. Venus is the other feminine planet, but in the sense of the externals of it. I mean, moon also has to do with beauty and all that stuff. But Venus is more about Srimatvam, which is the appearance of femininity. So prosperity, you get prosperity or opulence, which is wealth, enjoyment, and enjoyability. So wealth, you get this. I kind of broke this down a little bit. Wealth, you get. So that's why Venus represents like cars, couches, jewelry, stuff like that. Luxury items, wealth items. That's Venus. Srimat also means enjoyment. Vilas. So that's why Venus represents arts, things that are enjoyable. And enjoyment, like sex, sexuality, sensuality. Venus plays a huge role. If you use the word sex, then it's got a more martial feel to it. But if you say stuff like sensuality, that's very Venusian. So that's because Mars plays a big role in sexuality as well, because it's the masculine element. So, and then there's enjoyability. Venus also, Sriman also includes enjoyability, so that's why Venus represents how enjoyable something is, how beautiful it is, how delicious it is, etc. And then the togetherness, Sachivya, unity, unification. It's a peaceful planet. It's a unifying planet. That's why it's not so great right now when Venus is conjoined with Mars. What's Adolf Hitler again? Let me check this. For some reason, my mind wants to know Adolf Hitler's placements. Venus with Mars. He has Venus 1 degree from Mars, which is also like today, this past couple of weeks. So he's going to do similar things for Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, right? Personal traits, miscellaneous. So we can't go over every like detail that's in the book. We've already taken a half an hour. But if this kind of thing is very interesting, all those streams that we did on this are recorded. You don't actually really need me to do a review, because you could do that on your own spare time whenever you want. You can just go to my channel and go look on the videos page, right? Or maybe it's on the live streams or whatever. Somewhere on my channel page, you'll find all the live streams, and you can just go back through these. Michael Jackson. Why are you wondering Michael Jackson? Nobody knows his time, but that doesn't matter too much for this particular question. Wow, 1958. Michael Jackson's Venus is with Mercury and kind of by itself in Leo, mid Leo. It's almost exactly square to Mars. Yeah, you see here. Well, we don't know. We don't know his birth time. We don't know his birth time, but we know he's got a full moon. He's born in a full moon, so he's a moony person as well. So you might be thinking, wow, where's Michael Jackson's Venus? He's so feminine. He's got arts, dance, etc. He's beautiful. Must have a great Venus. Oh, well, Venus and Leo, huh? There's other ways to get the femininity, like having a full moon, for example, in Pisces. Dr. Gorov, if a planet has luminaries on either side, is it Shub or Papakarti? This is not counted as either. He'll go over that. Let's rush ahead now. So that's basically a taste of what he's doing with the planets. With the signs, to give you a taste, he did stuff like this. This was the first thing that he started. He started with this. He talked about things like what planet owns what sign, and what houses are exalted where. What's a base sign or mul tricone? He talked about stuff like that. So he did signs in groups of 2, groups of 3, groups of 4, etc. So again, if you're interested in that, it's there in the recorded streams. This is some interesting stuff about upwards, downwards, equal, and bent rays. Fire signs are upward, earth signs are downward, air signs are equal, and water signs are bent. He's just talking about earth, water, fire, air. Then he talks about the cardinal, fixed, and dual. Stuff like that. Ascending, descending, and equivocating. This was a big topic. We took a long time to figure this one out. So that's what we covered about the signs. Again, I feel that in classical texts, people rushed over the basic definitions of things because it wasn't so much of an issue when the classical text was written. People were pretty much on the same page. But today, this kind of stuff needs a lot more work. He defined houses. Basically just said what's what. First house is basic. Now, I could give you a faster way to understand what the houses are than what he gave. Like, to give a summary, I could give it to you, but it was not necessarily from his thing. Here's what he's giving, you see. Basically, to understand what the houses are all about, you just want to understand east, west, up, and down. And if you're watching any of the videos that I do about the house combinations, you're getting this already. So like east represents something because the sun rises there. West represents the other opposite because the sun sets there. The house that's in the east is the first. The house that's in the west is the seventh. So the eastern side represents visibility, birth, creation, and the self, the thing which is being created and made visible. The opposite side represents the opposite things. And then you have the underground layer of the sky represents your internals, and then the opposite side, the above, is the externals of life. So it's 4 is underground, 10 is overground. And then the other 8 houses are just based on what border the thing is on. For this, I'm doing that house by house, basically, more or less. So just watch any of the recent videos that I gave about third house and sixth house, third house and fifth house, third house and fourth house, second house and 12th, second and 11th. I've done all those videos. So in the beginning of each one of those, for most of them, I think maybe I didn't start that way with like first and second, but for most of them, you'll get an explanation first of what the houses represent. No, it's 8th embodied, but it of course depends on what house system or zodiac system you use. Does 8 degrees on a Scorpio moon matter? Everything always matters. Now here he also gave us Rashi Divisions. He defined Rashi Divisions, and this is pretty important. I have a pretty useless organization of it, so we'll just close that back up. Just a sec. Come on. So he defined these things. So he says and here's one reason, Eric, why 8 degrees matters. Whatever the degree is, degrees matter. This is one reason. Because the sign has sections within it. So just like a country is one place, but within the country there's various areas that are not uniformly the same. Like Alabama is not the same as Vermont. But in no way, shape, or form is Los Angeles the same as Minneapolis. But they're all American, so they do have something in common. Similarly, so the degrees within a sign are by no means exactly the same, although they all have something in common because they're all within a particular sign. So the way to suss that out, what the divisions are, he defines in this chapter, I think it's chapter 3. He's going to say you take the main sign, which is called the Kshetra, and then you should divide it into these sections, split it into 3 parts. That's one way of telling the difference between what the degrees. So 8 degree Scorpio is in the first Tribag, or Drakan, we say. And then later, he's going to explain what that means. First, he just tells you how to divide it up. He says, divide it into 3 parts. Also, just take the sign and divide it into 9 parts. So you have 3 within each 3. That's called a Navamsha. Also, take the sign and divide it into 10. Also, take the sign and divide it in half. Also, take the sign and divide it by 30ths and then apportion it a certain way. So like that. Also divide it into 7s. Also divide it into 60. Also divide it into 16ths. Also divide it into 12ths. Then when you have all those divisions, you have all the ways that you need to determine the difference between the 8th degree and the 8th degree 30 minutes. Bardo says, why nothing in astrology ever points to gender? I see. I mean, I did do a video all about the gender in astrology. It's not that old. It's like 2 months ago. So please look that up. That's in the Simple Beauty of Astrology series. It would be episode 3 or 4 or something. It's called the gender, how the zodiac expresses the gender spectrum or something like that. Just look up astrology, gender, Victicara, and you'll probably get that video come out of YouTube. But what you're asking is, how come if you pick up Michael Jackson's chart versus Janet Jackson's chart, there's no indicator in the chart that Michael Jackson is a boy and Janet Jackson is a girl. There's also no indication that he's African American or maybe he's Greek. Because why do you need an astrology chart to see that? You see that with your eyes. There's also no, well, I guess you could imply what era he is born into, but there's no indication whether, yeah, okay, so at least that. There's certain things, culture, there's certain things which are, the astrology chart has to be fit into. Really, if you want to know what it's like to do what I do, this is what it's like. It's like trying to take a medicine off a shelf, but you know that you can't give that medicine to the person who's sick because they won't digest it. So you have to figure out, you have to take that person's pantry and see what foods in that pantry you can mix this medicine with that will make that person eat the medicine on the proper schedule and digest it properly. That's what it's like to try to interpret a chart for somebody. When I look at somebody's chart, 9 times out of 10, I know the answer to whatever question they're asking within 30 seconds. Unless it's a really annoying question, or, like a really thing, like some super detailed annoying question. But most things take a very short amount of time for me to know the answer. But it takes sometimes hours and hours to figure out how to translate what's in here to what is something they can understand. So that's what astrology is. It's just taking these very abstract things and then translating it into the actual conditions of the person. And that's why, if a person is good at astrology, they're able to have they have to have a lot of Mercury, because they have to do this input-output bus. They have to take an internal concept and translate it into an external situation. Part of the external situation is their gender. Part of the external situation is the race and the way that they grew up and the ethnicity, and the cultural background. Something that you could tell to a person who grew up in India in 1943 would not make any sense at all to a person that grew up in Sweden in 2010. So those things are... See, the chart is like the abstract part, and then the things like what's the gender, etc., how old is this person currently, etc., etc. It's not really in there, but it's part of the thing that you have to translate into. That's what I would say. With this interesting question of how come you can't tell gender from a chart. But then again, in the back of my mind, there's a question in the back of my mind. Maybe you can. Maybe you can, and we just don't know it. But if that's the case, then you should also be able to tell the race, the ethnicity, etc. So that's another part of the answer, is maybe you actually can, but it's certainly not one of the things that you need to do, because you can look with your eyes or ask the person. So the way I see it is, it's more about those things are on the side that you're translating to, not what you're translating from. Yeah, you will definitely. Actually, it's very easy to tell the person's psychological inclination. So you said, why no Vaishnav Brahmana? You can certainly see that. But I think people are stupid about it and shouldn't try to overdo it. So let me explain that. Like, in other words, I could, by astrology, figure out what I should eat later. But there are easier, more direct ways to figure out what I should eat later. So why, except for the sake of exercise or experiment, would I try to figure out what I should eat later based on astrology? Why not just think about what my stomach is asking for, or why not just take a blood test or something? So in the case of, like, is a person a Brahmana, etc., what career? These things sometimes baffle me. Why do people need astrology for that? These things can be determined by looking at there's much more simple, direct ways to figure out. But what I see it being useful is when it's, in certain situations, confusing, the person is not clear on it. But the problem is, then you look at the chart, and the chart shows you that this is confusing, that it's not really clear what the person should be. So honestly, the easiest way to tell if somebody is a Vaishnava is if they behave in a Vaishnava way. The easiest way to tell if somebody is a Brahmin is if they behave in a Brahminical way. The easiest way to tell if somebody is a Kshatriya is if they behave that way. Can you figure it out by astrology? Can you confirm it with astrology? Yeah, you certainly can. So I think you also have to bear that in mind. And that also has to do with gender, the question that you had about gender. Can you not figure out if a person can you not figure out if you're a boy or a girl physically? You can figure that out. Or it's obvious that you're neither or both or something, right? So you don't need to go to an astrologer to ask. So that's probably one of the reasons why nobody ever developed systems for figuring it out. But that sort of that kind of thing also is something you should think about when it's like the other kinds of questions that you tend to ask an astrologer. Is there a simpler, more direct way to answer this question? If so, do it. Astrology is going to really shine for getting you the information that you can't get elsewhere or otherwise. Things that you can't see are very difficult to figure out. And the other way that I feel astrology is very, very useful is just as a third party. Right? Just as a third party or like an impartial confirmation or something. But then you have to have the interpreter be impartial. Okay, let's then talk a little bit about what he went over with techniques. So he talked about when are planets bad. So the goodness or badness of planets. He talked about the bala or the potency of planets. This is a very important concept. Let me see how the chat is doing. This is a very important concept that planets have to be in order to do any technique. You have to look at two things about a planet. You have to consider how good it is and how strong it is. If a planet is good, then it does good things with whatever it symbolizes. So, for example, Saturn represents reduction and restriction. If Saturn is in good conditions, then you will not get fat, you will not overindulge, you will not be frivolous, you'll be happy and content with minimal effort. So Saturn can produce very healthy, good things when it's in good conditions by using its, what do they call it? Portfolio of symbolism to create good things. With Jupiter, if Jupiter is in a bad condition, then you will be fat, gullible, easily manipulated, overly optimistic. What do they call it? Not frivolous, but overindulgent, etc. So when a planet is, so this is the one important thing that's for the basic technique of reading a chart is to be able to figure out if a planet is good or bad in the chart. Is it in a good condition or a bad condition? That's the one thing that he talks about. Because whatever the planet signifies will either go good or bad, depending on whether the planet is good or bad. And then the second thing to figure out, which is called Shadbala, is how potent is it? So for example, maybe I have a bad Jupiter that's not very potent. So it doesn't make a big effect. Maybe I have a strong Saturn that is very potent. So that quality of being serious and non-frivolous and minimalistic is a huge asset in my life because not only is Saturn good, but it's also prominent. So this really important fundamental astrological technique, it's the basis for all the other techniques, is to be able to parse the chart, to parse a particular planet, to see if it's good or bad and strong or weak. There are two different things and you have to be clear on that. That good and bad is different from strong or weak. You can be good and strong, you can be good and weak, you can be bad and strong, you can be bad and weak. And you want to evaluate the planets like that. So he gives a system called Shadbala, a six-fold analysis of a planet to figure out how potent it is, whether it's strong or weak, which you're going to need calculators and everything to do. And he also gives this thing some basic conditions about good and bad. Actually, this is very minimal. This is minimal. This is actually just more like a footnote somewhere. He's going to probably, this is more about it. The good and badness of the planet comes from its dignity. So when he defined signs, he actually spent a lot of time talking about that, talking about exaltation. Where's the rest of that in relation to planet? Yeah, he's got exaltation and domiciles and debilitations, etc. That's how you figure that. Strong and potent are the same. There's two categories of thing. Whether you're influential, strong, potent, and use any word, and whether you're good, positive. Those are the two categories. Then he gave some stuff about how you determine the person's career. It's a fairly short chapter, very odd thing. Planets in the 10th position from the sun, ascendant, and moon. And then the Lord and the Vamsha Lord of the 10th Lord. I don't know. This was a weird chapter. It's a very short one. Kind of out of place, sort of. Then he got into this house analysis thing. The reason why I have it in here is because this is the basis for the Houses of Life report. Oh, I don't even have that many notes on it here. But this is what we've been studying recently. The yoga section. Really? The yogas part is my favorite. This is why I really like the book. Actually, I really think this book is important for how it defines the sign divisions, the Rashi divisions. We kind of skipped that, didn't we? And also, yeah, it was very, very clear on that. So go back and watch those streams. If you want to review Phaladipika, that's a really important part to review, is the way that he defined the divisions of the Rashi are very clear and kind of groundbreaking on how you would consider the 60th division, the 16th, and I think it was the 3rd and 2nd. Let's say, these are the divisions that are not conventional zodiac sign divisions, and that was a very important part of the book. But the real gold in the book, I feel, at least in the first half of the book, is this. The yogas. He has a good collection. And this is recently we've been doing this. Like, all right, so the most basic yoga is the one that takes the planet being good and prominent and makes it into a little rule of thumb. Good and strong. So it's basically, so it says, hey, any one of the planets, if you put them in a good dignity and in a strong house, in a house that makes it strong, that's special. That's called a yoga. That's a special condition. And so the specifics of how he defines the good dignity is if it's in its domicile or exaltation, and the specifics of how he just defines a dominant house is Kendra, central house, 1, 4, 7, 10. This is the root building block of most of the other yogas as well. He talks about the neighbors, sun and ascendant yogas, all that kind of stuff. This is more recent. I got a little tired. I think I need to eat. I didn't get to eat. Bardo wants to know, where and when do you publish this? I'm not sure. It's definitely, I'm not sure. I'll probably publish it maybe after we finish yoga. The yoga's chapter, I'll publish the first bit of it. But it does need a lot of work on my side to get it ready. That's fine, Micah. That's the same thing. Do the 4 karmic debt numbers. No. 13, 16, they don't mean the same thing in every sign. There may be some case that we haven't run into yet where a classical astrologer says something like that. But the more common basic principle is, if you go and watch the video about how the signs are divided, you'll see that the third degree, for example, the first third of any sign is the first decan, but that doesn't mean that it's similar. The first decan of Aries belongs to Mars. The first decan of Taurus belongs to Venus. So if you're 3 degrees of a sign, it doesn't mean that you're martial. If you're 3 degrees of Aries, then it means martial. If it's 3 degrees of Taurus, if it's 3 degrees of Aries, then you're martial. If it's 3 degrees of Taurus, then it's Venusian. Another way that might make sense with 13, 16 is like fixed numbers and signs is things called avastas, which he actually mentioned also in the Rashi Divisions as another way of dividing up the signs. What he specifically mentioned is the first 5 degrees. You divide a sign into 5-degree segments. And that corresponds to the age. But it's also not the same in every sign. In a female sign, the age declines. In a male sign, the age increases. So if you're in a late degree in a male sign, then the planet feels old. If you're in an early degree in a female sign, the planet feels old. If you're in an early degree in a male sign, the planet feels young. If you're in a late degree in a female sign, the planet feels young. And it's a spectrum in between. So there isn't really something like karmic debt. I also feel that as a result of not studying classical texts, then there's a proliferation of ideas which sound classical, but aren't. And I understand that it's not a common... People don't commonly have the skill or ability to study classical texts because you have to know classical languages to study classical texts. But I think that people don't value the study of classical texts. You don't really need 1 million people to know Sanskrit, but you do. If you had 1 million people that wanted to know that wanted to learn what was in Sanskrit, then the 5 or 6 people that knew it would be highly employed. And they would be able to dedicate everything to it, and they would provide the world with quality information. So it's not really the fact that, well, I don't know Sanskrit, I can't study it's that you don't value classical knowledge. Because you were brought up in this modern viewpoint of newer is better. And progressing to the future. And humanity's advancing. The modern concepts that belittle classical and ancient things. So there's but then spirituality is something which is classical. So it becomes a big messy soup now. But when you get to spirituality in the modern age, or spiritual things, or occult things, because you'll see people talking about concepts which were well understood in the ancient and classical world without any reverence or respect for the ancient or classical body of knowledge itself. So coming up with ideas, and where does it come from? I don't know. A karmic debt number. What's a karmic debt? Like, I don't know. I study the classical stuff. I don't hear stuff like karmic debt numbers. But I'm sure if I Google karmic deck numbers, I'm going to get a whole lot of response, very recent, stuff, hot topic type of stuff. So this is another obstacle that sincere seekers have to face to getting to classical knowledge, is the proliferation of garbage from people who have no respect for ancient ways. Frankly, people do not have any respect for ancient ways. People basically only have respect for themselves. And so since they are not ancient and they're modern, they are not really respectful of ancient ways, and also they weren't even taught. It's not in their upbringing that old things are good. They're taught that new things are good. So this is why you're not going to be popular when you're a classicalist. Because you can't put that new thing, that new sticker on your product all the time. Okay, I'm too hungry right now. If I keep talking, then I'm just going to get really grumpy. So I'll see you guys later.